Hey guys, I know it's been a while. Thank you so much to everybody who's still subscribed and to the people that are subscribing. I really appreciate it. In today's video, we will be learning how to knit a watermelon baby hat. Alright, so bear with me. You're going to need a couple of things. One of them obviously being 3 different color types of yarn. And they don't have to be these colors. You can choose any color you would like. For this one, I used mint green for the beginning, white for the edge. And I know the color here on the camera actually looks kind of corally, but it's actually a hot pink. Alright, well, let's get started. Alright, so things you will need. Obviously the yarn, and please don't judge, I'm using kind of leftover yarn. This is my messy pile for the white. This is all size 4, by the way. So we have one pile here. Let's ignore that. We have another leftover of the mint yarn. Let's also just, ignore that. And then we have the hot pink that I'm using, which is actually from a nice little ball. So I know in most of my other videos I've actually used size 8 knitting needles. In this one we will be using size 4 knitting needles. Size 4 double pointed knitting needles, which by the way, these are completely optional. You do not need to actually get these. I am actually just really bad at closing off hats on the circular knitting needles when it gets to, very few stitches. But I have seen comments from people, and I've actually seen people too where they somehow miraculously will close off the hat with these, and I can't do it. But props to all of you that can, and if you want to close off the hat on the needles, you are more than welcome to. You do not need to buy these. This is just what I use because it's easier for me. But whatever is easier for you and whatever works for you is what you should go with. Don't feel like you need to buy all the tools that I have here, because aside from these, you really don't need to buy anything else. Some stitch markers, which again, you do not need to buy these either. You can actually just use some leftover yarn, make a loop and tie it with a knot, and that could actually be your stitch marker. These were actually just gifted. A stitch counter, which is also optional. You do not need to buy this. This was actually also a gift, but it is nice because it helps keep track of your rows for you. Scissors. And last but not least, your knitting needles. You use these when you're closing off the hat. Alright, let's get started! Alright, so we're gonna start with the mint green yarn that I have right here, and as I previously mentioned, it doesn't have to be this color. You can use any color you want, but I do recommend using at least the same size yarn. I have size 4 worsted yarn here, and if you look in the description, I've labeled each brand of yarn too, because I think all of those matter as well. Some brands make their yarn a little thicker than others. Just be sure to keep in mind that different thicknesses will provide obviously different results. So we're gonna go ahead and leave a long enough tail for this. I typically do about my arm's length. I have short arms though, so if you have a lot left over, it's okay as long as it's not an insane amount. So we're gonna start off by making a loop with a knot, and then you're going to place that loop on the needle and cast on 65 stitches. Keep in mind that only the first stitch should be tight. The rest of the stitches should be fitted to the needle and not super tight. Because remember, this is going to be for a baby head, and so you're going to want that edge to be stretchy. Okay, so that should be 65. And I know I said earlier to make sure it's not super tight, but I also want to make sure you know, to at least have it consistent. We don't want, you know, a cast on that is fitted here and then a super loose one, because it'll be a little wonky when you knit the hat. So just make sure they're not super tight, but also consistent. So once you have your 65, just kind of stretch them around. Make sure they're all the same, in the same general direction. Okay. Oops, I got turned around somehow. Okay. And you'll see here that this is actually what I have left over from my tail. We can go ahead and leave that for now. We're not going to cut it yet. We'll wait till we finish the hat and then we'll go ahead and you know, tuck this in somewhere. So we're going to bring that first stitch over to your right needle and place it in front of your last stitch. And then we're going to grab your last stitch and hook it over and bring it over your first stitch. And it's okay if that stretches a little bit as long as it stays connected. So once you bring it over, make sure your first stitch is still on the needle, and then you can go ahead and move that loop over from your left needle. Just bring it up and you'll see that it's still connected. It's okay if this is a little stretched. You can bring the two together and close that gap by just pulling on the strings. And as you can see, it's now connected. So now we can go ahead and place our stitch marker, which again, you don't have to purchase these. Let's say you have a lot left over as a tail, you can cut a piece of that off and just make a loop and use it as a stitch marker instead. Just keep in mind, if you do that, don't cut this too short, because we're gonna actually be knitting part of this back into the hat. And you'll also notice that you now should have 64 stitches, because when we did the passover, we actually decreased the stitch, so we should now have 64. If you still have 65, then maybe we did something wrong somewhere. But hopefully everybody has 64. Okay, so we're now going to begin with the first row, and it's going to be pretty simple. It's just going to be knit 2, purl 2 all the way around, and that's actually going to be the pattern for the next 5 rows. So up until row 5, we are going to be knitting 2 and purling 2. And again, just make sure we're not making them super tight. As you can see that I'm pulling on them, but I'm not pulling on them to make them super tight, just enough to where they're, you know, hugging the needle, so to speak. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish this up. Okay, I just finished the first row, so I'm gonna go ahead and move the little stitch marker over. And if you're using a stitch counter, you'll see that I already have it marked on 1, because this is technically the first row. So my next one is gonna be row 2. Obviously you don't need a stitch counter. You can count it in your head or mark it down and tally it, however is easier for you. So we're at the end of row 5. We're gonna go ahead and move our stitch marker over, and this is where we're gonna start with the other color. We're gonna switch over to white, or whatever color you decided on. And before we switch over, I would leave a long enough tail, maybe 2 or 3 inches. I'm terrible at measuring, but you know, just enough to where you can put a needle through it or tie it off. You'll see at the end why. So we're gonna go ahead and cut this. And now you can set that yarn aside because we're not gonna use it anymore. Oops, stitch marker fell out. And with this, we can just go ahead and push it to the back. Just kind of hold on to it for now so that it doesn't come loose. So we're gonna grab our white yarn, and we're also gonna kind of do like a little loop, but we're not gonna tie anything, or we're not gonna knot anything. Just leave a long enough tail for now. We can have that right there for now. And you know, this is what you just cut off. We're not knitting that. You're gonna take your needle and put it behind like you were about to knit, and then you're gonna take your loop and just put it right there. And you can hold it so that it doesn't come loose, and then bring it through. And then that's it. We've now switched colors. So now we'll continue knitting the rest of the row with the white. And for this one, we're only going to do 2 rows, and it's all going to be knit. So rows 6 and 7 are just going to be knit. When you get to that last stitch, which is where we pretty much stopped knitting with the green color, just be a little careful with it because we don't want it to come completely loose. Although if you left a long enough tail, you shouldn't have a problem. But you'll see here it kind of stretched out a little bit. Just go ahead and tighten it a little bit. And then move your stitch marker over, and same when you are going on to the next row, because this is, you know, nothing's holding on to this essentially. Just make sure after you do your next knit, you'll see how stretchy it looks. Just go ahead and tighten that as well. That way it's not super stretched out. Then you can continue on with the rest of the row. Okay, so we're at the end of row 2 with the white, and we're gonna go ahead and move the stitch marker over. Now we can go ahead and cut this as well. You can leave it about the same length as the other ones. It's up to you. So we'll go ahead and cut this one now. And now we're gonna go ahead and move on to our third color. And same as before, we're gonna do a little kind of a little loop here. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and pass it behind. And with this, we're gonna knit 2 rows, and then we're gonna start with the rest of the pattern. We're at the end of row 8. We should now be on row 9, and this is where we're gonna start with the pattern. On this one, oops, you'll see it's coming loose here, don't worry about that. So on this one, we're gonna knit 6. And then we're gonna do a yarn over, which is where you just loop it around the needle but don't knit it yet. And then we're gonna knit 2 stitches together. So you'll see you have a little gap right there. And we're gonna do that for the rest of the row. It's gonna just be knit 6, yarn over, knit 2 together. this is the end of row 10. We'll move that stitch marker over. Now for the next 4 rows, which I guess, what is that? 11 through 14. So rows 11 to 14, we are just gonna knit the 4 rows. I will see you guys when we are done with those 4 rows. Don't forget, when you get over to that yarn over, you're just gonna go ahead and knit that, and you'll see that it left this hole there. Don't worry, that kind of closes up a little bit as you knit along. You should now be on row 15, and we're gonna do things a little differently here. So we're gonna go ahead and knit 2, and then we're gonna yarn over, knit 2 together, and then we are gonna go back to knitting 6, yarn over, and then knitting 2 together. And when you get to the end of the row, you should have 4 stitches left where you will knit 4 stitches. I'm at the end of the row, and you'll see after I did the last yarn over and knit 2 together, I have 4 stitches left. And just remember, that's what you should end up with, because if you kind of add the first 2, then you'll see that we still have the knit 6. So now we'll be on row 16. Row 16 through 18, we're just going to go ahead and knit those 3 rows. Kind of doing like a little countdown where we started with knit 4, now we're just going to be knitting 3. Remember to knit the stitch that you did the yarn over on. Once you're done with row 18, on row 19 we're going to repeat what we did on row 10. And that was where we knit 6 and then did the yarn over and then knit 2 together. And we're just going to repeat that for the whole row. After you've completed row 19, rows 20 and 21 are just going to be knit. So for the next 2 rows, we're just going to go ahead and knit. We're now at the end of row 21. On row 22, we're going to repeat what we did earlier. So we're going to repeat what we did on row 15, where we knit 2, yarn over, knit 2 together, and then we're going to go back to knitting 6, yarn over, and then knit 2 together. And we'll do that for the rest of the row. Rows 23 and 24, we're just going to go ahead and knit. Sorry guys, I actually lost the recording for this one. So for row 25, we're going to knit 6, yarn over, knit 2 together, and then we're going to repeat that for the rest of the row. Once you finish that row, the next 2 rows are going to be knit, same as before, and then after that we will repeat the yarn over one more time, and then we'll start decreasing. Okay, so after you finish those 2 rows, we can go ahead and knit 2, yarn over, knit 2 together, and then same as before, knit 6, and then we're gonna yarn over again, and then knit 2 together, and we'll do that for the rest of the row. And this will actually be the last row where we will be doing the yarn overs. If you want to make the hat a little bigger, you can actually repeat the pattern one more time, and then that should produce a slightly bigger hat, because you know, not all baby heads are the same. So if you would like to make it a little bigger, you're more than welcome to, but that's just optional. You don't have to do it. Once you finish that row, we're gonna go ahead and knit 2 more rows, and then after that we're gonna start decreasing. After you've completed those 2 rows, we're gonna go ahead and start decreasing. So for row 1, it's going to be knit 6 and then knit 2 together, and we're just gonna repeat that for the rest of the row. On the row after that, we're going to knit 5 and then knit 2 together. And we're pretty much going to be doing that until we're done with it. Okay, so after you move the stitch marker, then we're gonna go ahead and knit 4, and then knit 2 together, and we'll be repeating this for the rest of the row. Okay, next row, same as before, we're pretty much counting down. So we're gonna knit 3, knit 2 together, and then we're going to repeat that for the rest of the row. And as you can already see, I'm already struggling a little bit on these. So probably on the next row, I'm gonna switch over to the double pointed needles. And as I've mentioned before, this is completely optional. You don't need to switch over to these. You don't even have to buy them. If you want to continue knitting the hat on the circular knitting needles, you can. This is just something that's easier for me. So whatever works best for you is probably what you should go with. After you're done with that row, if you are continuing on the circular knitting needles, you can go ahead and just move your stitch marker over, and you will knit 2 and then knit 2 together, and you'll continue that for the rest of the row. I'm actually gonna go ahead and switch over to the double pointed needles. And these typically come in sets of 5s, but I usually only use 4. If you are switching over to the double pointed needles and you're not sure on how to knit with them, There are tons of videos out there that you can look up. Normally I would say look at my video for it, but I haven't done one, so feel free to look at other videos. Starting the row, you would knit as you normally would, except you're starting with one of the double pointed needles. And because we're only using 4 needles, we're technically only going to have 3 needles on the hat at a time, if that makes sense. So it'll usually end up looking like a little triangle that you're knitting on as you switch them out. As you can see, I've got 8 or 9 stitches on that first needle, so I'm gonna go ahead and start knitting with the second needle now. I forgot to mention this, but make sure that the last stitch on each of the double pointed needles is a knit 2 together. You'll see that I didn't do a very good job at evenly spacing out the stitches, but that's okay, at least for this one, since we're not doing a different type of pattern right now. So now I can go ahead and start knitting with the third needle, and that's where I'll just put the rest of these stitches. After that last stitch, you'll see I don't have any stitches left on the circular knitting needles anymore, so we can put that away for now, unless you're still knitting on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the 4th needle now, and that's what I'll start the new row on. And this one is going to be knit 1, knit 2 together. So you should end up with a little triangle and about 16 stitches. And the last row, we're just gonna knit 2 together for the rest of the row, better yet. And that should bring us down to about 8 stitches. I'm just finishing up these last couple of stitches. Oops, poked the camera. Okay, so with that you should have about 8 stitches, and then we can go ahead and leave a long enough tail and then just go ahead and cut that. Now we can get the knitting needles. I'm gonna go ahead and loop that through. And for this, you're just gonna pass it underneath each stitch, forward going towards the back. And as you do that, pull the stitch off of the needle. And then you're gonna pull it closed. And there's your hat. We're not done yet though. So after you pull it closed, you're gonna see it looks like a little flower. We're gonna pull it tight and then pass the needle through on the opposite side and then just pull it through. And then we're gonna turn the hat inside out. And you'll see we have all of these that we worked with earlier. We're gonna come back to these in a second. So after you've pulled it there, what we're gonna do after that is just just pass it through a couple of the stitches from the inside. And it's not gonna affect how it looks on the opposite side. It's just so that it doesn't come loose. And there's no specific way that you have to do it, just pass it through a couple of stitches. Make sure it's all on the inside of the hat, not towards the outside. And then you can just go ahead and cut it. Okay, so now we come back to these. And what we're gonna do here is tie them together. So we'll take the pink and the white, do a little knot, and the same for the green and the white. Remember to pull on it so that it makes a tight knot. And then we'll take the knitting needle and similar to what we did at the top, we'll do down here, but make sure to pass it through the pink ones. And we're not going to do a lot either. So I did it through 3, and that should be good enough, and then you can go ahead and cut it. And then same with the white yarn. We're going to go ahead and pass it through the white stitches. Also make sure that you're knitting these going in the same direction so that it's going around each stitch. And then after that, we're gonna do the same thing to the next 2 strings below. Go ahead and cut that one. Okay, then we can go ahead and cut that. And now your last one, which is where you started. For this one, we're gonna turn the hat a little bit so that we're looking at the outside. And we're gonna pass the needle through the stitch next to it so that it kind of looks like a purl stitch from the outside. See? And now from the inside, we're gonna bring it down and through your knit stitch. This is on the inside of the hat. And then we'll do it again on the one below it. And then one last time. It'll look like it's just doubled up a bit, and that way it goes along with the pattern as well. And then we can go ahead and cut that, and that's it. Then you can go ahead and turn your baby hat inside out. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe.